podcast listeners. This is Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. This is Raising 10, episode 14, I believe. And listen, I appreciate you listening in. I appreciate all the views, comments. If you ever want to get a hold of me directly, you can reach me on any of my social media pages or at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. You can visit my website, which is edfranklinnolimits.com, all one word. No dots or anything in that one except for .com. And like I said, I appreciate you listening. We've touched on this topic a little bit in the past, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into it. And listen, I wish I could do a podcast that was just all the good news about being a parent and tell you all the fun times we had and how easy it is being a parent and all those things. But the reality is it's just not that easy being a parent all the time. And a lot of the topics we've been bringing up lately, you just don't think about when you have kids. You're in a relationship, you have a child, everybody's happy, the baby comes, you have a baby shower, you have all these things and birthdays and all the fun stuff. But when it really gets down to it, you are in a position to lead this child. You're in a position to manage this person. And it's not that easy all the time. And we've talked about leadership and kind of the things that parenting teaches you as a leader or as a manager, and it bleeds into life, right? If you're a manager at work or you do something for a living where you have people that are working for you, a lot of the things you do as a parent can lead to making you a better leader. The problem is, and I'll ask you this question straight out, and I'm looking over to the side here at some things, is that when you're not leading your kids, who is leading them? Could be a coach, could be a teacher, could be their friends. It could be something online. It could be a game. It could be a lot of different things. It could be a stranger online. And we're just going to kind of go through some things that I think you should keep in front of your mind when you're raising your children. And if you get into a position where unfortunately you're not present every second of their life, somebody else is leading them. And that could be the media. That could be a lot of different things. So the reality is that kids model what they see and not what they're told all the time. I have 8 kids and 2 grandchildren, and I have 20 grandchildren, but I'm raising 2 of them. And I try to do my best to tell them the reality of things, because what will happen, especially with my oldest grandchild, he gets information from other sources and then comes, and he doesn't challenge me with them, but we definitely have conversations about where that information came from and what the information is actually. And a lot of times it's very different. So you understand that I raised kids in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And if you're raising kids now, we have a way different information system than we did back then. I've told you before that social media wasn't that popular when my kids were young. It just became popular as they were getting older and becoming adults. And even at that level, they're still getting influenced by, where they work, who they're working with, things like that. And if you're an employer and you're in this leadership position, which I'm talking a lot more about leadership because of another business that I have going, you don't know what's going on all the time in the front line. And that could be an old employee that's just tired of working for you or something, and they're giving these new people bad information. And it's no different than when you're raising the kids. So you talk about screens, TikTok and YouTube and all these influencers out there telling kids who they should be or what they should be doing, and their parents don't know anything and all this. And you're going to get that as a parent. You're going to get somebody telling your kids something that you don't believe in, or you don't believe it's relevant, or whatever the case may be. Your kids are going to get influenced by other people. I know when I was a kid, our teachers really never talked about politics unless we were learning about politics. And it wasn't their opinion that mattered. It was what was in the history book. Now, whether you believe what's in the history book is true or not doesn't matter. The point I'm making here is that a lot of times the teachers' personal feelings or sexual orientations or whatever, religion could come into play as they're teaching your kids things. And it might be exactly opposite of what you're trying to teach your kids. You're going to have moments in your life where you've told your children something and they do exactly opposite of what you told them, or they do something that's kind of what you said, but not really what you said. And that could be on you too, and how you explained it to them and why you explained it that way. I told you before, you need to have reasons for giving your kids particular answers. I think it's easier when you're communicating like that. Think about the people your kids are growing up with. I always tell my kids, I can tell you where you'll be in 2 years if you tell me what you're reading on a regular basis, what you're watching, and who you're hanging out with. And that was very relevant when I was a kid. I hung out with some kids that were not perfect citizens all the time. And my mom, it never bothered my mom that that was the case because she knew, she hoped that I would always make the right decisions. And I did, for the most part, stay true to what I was doing. I worked when I was young. I did all those things. My friends necessarily didn't work when we were young. They were a little lazier. I was an early riser. They were not. Whether that means anything to you or not, it's just way, when I was growing up, that's how it was. So my parents weren't very concerned about who I was hanging out with because they figured I never was arrested. I never got in trouble with the police or at school. Kind of an interesting thing. I only missed one day of high school in 4 years. And the day I missed was I was with my parents. We went and got my permit, and I got a ticket on a skateboard, of all things, by a California Highway Patrolman. And I had to go to court and pay a small fine. But you think about teachers and coaches, and we've heard a lot of stuff in the news today. In fact, this morning, my wife just brought me an article about a child that made some threats at a middle school in Poway, California. And he reached out to the staff to say he was going to do something violent, which uh, obviously he was reaching out for some other reason. But, the police are involved now, and he's probably going through psychological exams and everything else. And we see these things in games where some of these games that my grandson plays are very violent, and it almost gives life less meaning because he's seeing these things happen in these games. Culture, I mean, the way music is when we were being raised in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of very influential music uh, talking about death and suicide and all these other things. The 80s were crazy music. I mean, it all was about just being promiscuous and doing all these things. And although that was my genre, the 80s music. And I mean, we were definitely influenced on how we dressed, the way we wore our hair, the way we did a lot of different things. So you have all these outside things going on when you're raising kids that you really don't, know what's going on, because once they start going to school, especially in middle school and high school, you're not seeing them but a couple hours a day usually. And if you have a job where you're traveling or you're doing things outside, they're getting coached by someone else. They're getting led by somebody else. And the problem is, this is, do you want them being led by somebody else? This is where your communication skills are going to really have to be sharp to talk to your kids. And like I said, I think a lot of my listeners have already raised kids and they now have grandchildren. And I hope that they're talking to their children about these things that I talk about on this podcast, because it's relevant, it's important, and it's something that's never going to go away. Like I said earlier, we don't plan on all these pieces of being a parent before we have kids. We don't sit down and read a book and have a manual to read and say this is what's going to happen. And because your kids are so different, they're going to assimilate information. They're all going to get information differently. Listen, none of my kids were perfect. And I had a couple kids that definitely were not hanging around the right people, and it led them down a bad path. And they're still dealing with that. I'm still dealing with that, thus raising two grandchildren. So I'm not here. I told you this podcast is about my point of view as a father when my kids were growing up. It's nothing against mothers or anything, because they have the same things to deal with. And I'm not telling you how to parent. You're going to parent the way you parent. Probably the way you were parented is going to enter a lot into how you do things. Um, I did not have a perfect childhood growing up. Nobody has a perfect childhood growing up, but I probably had, I mean, really, in the whole scheme of things, it was not good. Thank God for my mother, because she was the one that kind of held things together and got us the information that we needed. I have a note here that says, be present and be consistent, right? consistency is a huge thing with kids, uh, and not the do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. That kind of went out the window. And I'm a baby boomer, and that's how we were raised. Don't do what I do, do what I say. Even if it's, I mean, my parents used to sit there and smoke in front of me in the house, drink black coffee, and then tell me not to smoke when I got older. And it's how hypocritical is that? Um, you got to be the loudest person in the room. I mean, if you're going to talk to your kids, I have a really when I was taking my kids to school, we got a chance to sit and talk every morning for 15 or 20 minutes sitting in traffic or whatever. And it was a valuable time because we talked about a lot of different topics. We had conversations after dinner. I have my granddaughter every other week and I take her to school and it's about a 20-minute drive and we have some very good talks about different things. And sometimes she asks me questions that I have to be careful with how I answer them, but nevertheless, we're communicating and we're talking about different things on a regular basis that I hope to help her. And you got to model what you want repeated, right? You got to be, if you're one of these people that wants your kids to stay in shape and be athletic and do all those things, you need to do the same thing. You can't sit there and be 350 pounds and tell your kids they need to work out. But it's happening because I see parents out there that are encouraging their kids are getting involved in sports, are getting involved in certain different things, and then they're not doing anything for their own good. Um, what they watch on TV, huge thing. I think we made some mistakes on what we let our kids watch on TV. Nothing X-rated or R-rated, but definitely some sitcoms that were not a good idea looking back, especially with girls. Um, the 80s and 90s were, like I said, there was a lot of promiscuity going on. And we probably didn't do a good job at speaking to them from a religious point of view and things like that. We thought we had given them enough information, but I don't think that was always the case. And I'm not pointing out any kids. I'm just saying we probably could have done a better job of, what we were letting get into their brains. We talked about culture in the house, and there's a note I have here that says create a home culture stronger than the outside noise. That's really important. So we spent a lot of time together. We weren't always, when the kids were hanging out with friends, they were usually at our house. They weren't usually out going, doing something else. We would set up an environment where we had pool parties and things like that, where the kids were encouraged to come over and hang out. And we weren't drinking too much or doing any of those things, but I was definitely drinking and smoking in front of kids, and they weren't always my kids. And if those kids, the friends, if the kids' friends came over for dinner, we definitely talked the way we talked. I didn't change my personality because of the way they were there, and my personality could have been very, very different than their parents' personality. What I thought was okay and what I didn't think was okay. We used bad language sometimes, and I still use bad language, and I don't think much of it. But there are parents out there that do not want their kids around that kind of environment. But they were at our house, and like I said, we didn't change our personality or anything. And for the most part, we were giving them all positive information. We weren't giving them any negative things to talk about. In fact, I was super encouraging and still am, and still have that kind of enthusiasm and ambition. I'm still very ambitious, so I was always encouraging the kids to be ambitious. I saw a great meme the other day, which I posted on Facebook, that said, to get comfortable with your solitude if you're ambitious, because when you're ambitious, people tend to not hang out with you. They don't want to talk to you because you're always kind of pushing them or you're pushing yourself. And since they're not doing it, it they feel bad or whatever. Just looking at more notes I had. The saying is, if you don't lead your kids, someone else will. Someone else will be out there, and you may not like the results of that. And like I said, I had a couple kids that hung out with some people that led them down a bad path, and it was their decision ultimately. But if they wouldn't have been around those people, and this was at a time when I didn't have, they were old enough, they were doing things on their own that I didn't know about, and they were out of the house. It wasn't like I was, being able to, directly parent them. Um, so he's just like I said, I want to just tell you that this is all good news about having kids. And it is good news if you do a good job communicating with your kids, staying close to them, understanding who they're hanging out with, encouraging them to be their friends example and not using the example of a bad kid. Uh, you know, it's funny. There's just this joke about excuse me. There's a joke about women how they like bad boys, right? And I had a couple of those boys come into the kid's life, and ultimately it didn't work out. But there's definitely an attraction there, and this has been something going on since the beginning of time. If you watch any movies from the '50s, there's always these women that want to hang out with the bad guys, that want to hang out with the gangsters or the guys that are rebels. Rebel Without a Cause was a big movie, and there was all these, James Dean and all these Elvis Presley when he was acting like a bad guy. And women are attracted to that a lot of times. I'm not saying that in general. I don't want to insult women. I'm just saying sometimes that kind of stuff happens. And it's the same for guys. I'm not saying it's any different. Sometimes, uh, sometimes guys want to hang out with those little more different girls. We'll just say it that way. I'm like, don't want to insult anybody. Not my intention. I'm just letting you know that you got to keep your eye on all this stuff going around. My daughter had a coach, a basketball coach once, and if you were late to basketball practice, he would make you run laps. And I think it was a lap per minute you were late. And at one point, she was playing basketball and she was off for a week. It could have been like Christmas vacation or something, or some kind of holiday week. And I had to take her to another school to play basketball. And I was dressed for work. I had to come home and get her and then take her. And then I had to go back to work when I was done. So picked her up, dropped her off at the thing. Well, the coach wasn't there, and practice was supposed to start at like 3 o'clock sharp, and he was about 10 minutes late. And I said, sir, if you're going to punish these girls when they're late, you need to set an example and be on time. And I tell you, the guy pissed the guy off really bad because I called him out on it. And I told you I'm usually not one of those people that is going to sugarcoat things. And I don't think that coach talked to me the rest of the season. Right? Samantha still got to play, but I called this coach out on it because those are the examples, you know, that we have to set for our kids. So, like I said, I'm just going through these notes. If there's anything else I went, culture's a big deal. I mean, when you talk about music and what's happened to our music in the last 20 or 30 years, where there's really no rules anymore. It's just whatever these artists want to say, they can say. And since we have Sirius Radio and YouTube and all these other things, they don't sugarcoat it at all. When I was a kid, you couldn't even say the word ass in a song. They would bleep it out on the radio because of the FCC. Well, the FCC doesn't control this podcast, for instance. I've cussed on this podcast, and you could easily, if I was doing this and I was under the reins of the FCC, they would either cancel me or bleep it or do whatever they have to do. So we have that stuff too coming out. And some of these games, the way they do the ratings and some of the situations they have, these are things your kids are going to see. And just you have no control over it. I got news for you. There's going to be you can't be with your kids 24 hours a day. And they're going to have. I mean, they have cell phones. They have the internet at school. They have all these things they can do, and the school computers could block it, but the kid's phone won't block it. So, kind of depending on how they're being led at home, those friends could influence your kids too. So, listen, I know it's redundant. I've done it before in a podcast. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about all these things. We've talked about culture. But I'm telling you, if you're not leading your kids, who is leading them? You need to be that loud voice in the room. You need to be the one where they have some reverence for you. So when you are telling them something, they're respecting what you're telling them. You could go through some of the things that go out in public schools. And now they have laws in California, especially that teachers can tell your kids things that you have no control over. My granddaughter attends a private school, which it's a Christian-based school, so we don't have as much of that to deal with. But I got news for you. The kids are learning stuff at home that they're bringing to school. So I'm telling you, it's all these things, that you have to be careful of. And when you get older and you go to work, it's the same way. You're going to get influenced by who's your leader, who your leaders are, and what they're going to tell you and kind of influence they're going to put out there. So I'm just saying, as a cautionary member, excuse me, as a cautionary reminder, you don't know you don't know who is leading your kids. Man, I can't even talk today. So be aware, be conscious, and keep the lines of communication open with your kids. Super important. Give them good information. Um, give them good things to read, media wise, or to watch on TV. There's still good stuff on TV. Some of it's just gotten so out of control. Um, and listen, I'm not the moral police. It's your business. You do what you want to do. I'm just telling you that your kids, the way whoever's leading them and however they're behaving and however they'll behave in the future is paramount to their success. And you know that. I don't have to tell you that. I didn't have to do this podcast, but I thought it was necessary since I've been talking about leadership and culture that we talk about who's leading your kids because you just don't know. The online presence and AI and all these things out there can be really dangerous. They can be really positive too. I use AI daily, but not for negative stuff. I use it for positive things. So again, this is Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. This is Raising 10, episode 14. If you have any ideas or things you want me to talk about, I'm happy to do that. So let me know if there's a particular topic. The reason I got on this parenting thing is because somebody recommended I do a podcast on parenting. And it went from me doing a 45-minute podcast to me doing the Raising 8 series and now the Raising 10 series, which got to have over 21 or 22 podcasts just on individual items. I have a interview this afternoon with a gentleman who's a doctor, and he's gonna be on next week, I hope. And so don't miss my podcast. You can always go to my YouTube channel and go to playlists if you just want to see what I posted as far as the Raising 10 and Raising 8 things, podcasts, and then please subscribe. And then if I do a podcast, I'll let you know it's even out there. If you go to my shorts, I'm doing shorts all the time, and those are a little tighter, short thing. You can just hear snippets of my podcast. So keep watching on Facebook, keep looking at my reels, and I really appreciate you. I can't even tell you enough. I hope that your parenting experience was like mine, which was 90% of it was the most successful part of my life. But there were those moments, and you're going to have those moments too. And when you do, just remember that this too shall pass, as my mom used to say. So, Ed Franklin, Raising 10, No Limits podcast. I will see you soon. Happy Valentine's Day is Saturday, and I hope you get a chance to enjoy your significant other. So, have a great day.